I'm Thanasi Kambanis. You're listening to Order from Ashes. Today, we have the fifth of 5 episodes in the Broken Bond series, the existential crisis of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, 2013 to 2022. Today, one of the book's co-authors, Ahmed El-Afifi, is joining me to talk about the third and final crisis of the ones the researchers identified, the membership crisis, and also about the way forward, the policy implications and the future, what all this research says about the future of the Brotherhood. Ahmed, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
So in the previous 4 episodes, we've heard about Ayash's personal journey as a kid who grew up in the Brotherhood and ended up eventually drifting away and becoming a researcher. We heard about the sort of big picture, why this matters from the 3 of you co-authors, from you and Noha Khalid and Ayash talking together about what the significance of the Brotherhood is and why we should care about its crisis today, what the significance of that is for Egypt and for international policy in general. Then we heard from Noha about the identity crisis. We heard from Ayash about the legitimacy crisis. And now we're here with you today, Ahmed, to talk about the membership crisis, which in some ways as a social historian in my long ago origins is one of the most interesting prisms through which to talk about this crisis. So tell us what exactly you mean to start with when you refer to a membership crisis.
Thank you so much. So the best way to think about this membership crisis is as a culmination of Noha and Ayesh's interjections. So just like to bring everyone up to speed with the identity crisis, what Noha or what the book is arguing is that the Brotherhood through different historical junctures failed to have a positive definition of what it is, right? And it was sort of like molded and reshaped in the image of society in some aspects, in the image of the state in some aspects, and it sort of like its sense of adaptability morphed with that as well, right? So like it was colored by what society was doing and what the state was doing at the time, from Nasser to Sadat to Mubarak, through different repressive waves. What Ayat says in the legitimacy crisis, and what he I'm sure presented on, is that the way in which people built their own legitimacies within the organization was oftentimes based on certain ordeals they endured, right? The ordeal of 65, having lived in hiding for certain amounts of years. There are narratives and stories about people who hid during Nasser and were in hiding for 20 years within the country that showed that like only came out after.
Right, it's sort of suffering as the badge of credibility for organizational leadership.
Absolutely. So now post 2013, we're in a place where the organization is torn in different countries, right? There's a lot of members who fled the country, who fled Egypt, who are in Sudan. People are in Qatar. People are in Malaysia. Folk are in Turkey. So when we think through the prism of this identity crisis, you no longer have one society. You no longer have one state in which the Brotherhood can adapt. It can sort of like mold its organization, its aura into, and you have people who came out from a certain type of experience and socialization into different types of socializations, into different type of societies, ranging from democratic to severely autocratic, in ways that impacted how they think about the world and how they think about their membership within the organization. And within the prism of the legitimacy crisis as well, you have people who are born in the 90s onwards, right, mid to late 90s, who endured episodes of repression, torture, victimization, prison that are as severe or more severe than what these ordeal-based legitimacies that happened in the 60s and 70s and onwards, or 60s and later in the 90s onwards, were based on. And within that is the contradiction of this membership crisis, right? Like what does it mean to be a brother? How do we rethink these legitimacies within the organization, and what does the Brotherhood as an organization have to offer these people in its state of crisis as well? It doesn't have the same social fabric as it used to. It doesn't have the same amount of money and networks as it used to once in Egypt, as a space for people to like enjoy, or like uh, go up the ranks of of the social ladder, so to say.
So this is at heart, when you talk about, when you refer to a membership crisis, you're starting with this notion of, it no longer means what it used to. It no longer means the same thing to be a member of this organization. And the sort of stories that we heard at the very beginning of your book, and at the beginning of this 5-part podcast series, the stories we heard from Ayash about, growing up and having your dentist, or your imam, or your tutor, or the person who's going to help you, get learn how to do infotech stuff, and then maybe even start a career in IT. All of these benefits that are sort of intangible support, and community and belonging, from your school to your neighborhood and so on, that come from the Brotherhood. You're saying this no longer exists. It's no longer something the Brotherhood can use to draw members.
Exactly. The recruitment and retention mechanisms that the Brotherhood had in Egypt are no longer viable in its different types of exiles, um, and are probably no longer viable in Egypt either. So the Brotherhood has to contend with an HR problem, essentially, right? How do we continue to bring people in? How do we continue to retain these people? And what do we need to develop to make sure that we are still viable as an entity of sorts, as a non-state actor into the next decade or so.
So you talked about the organization not having the resources that it used to have to help support people's education, or take care of widows or families while people are in prison, and create these sort of network of services that was so appealing to people. And at the same time, there must be also a parallel crisis in the communal and ideological meaning of membership, right? If today the organization is thriving in exile or in prison, and meanwhile in Egyptian society it's at the margins, illegal, banned, and underground, it must be a real confusing question for an existing Brotherhood member, or a prospective Brotherhood member, to say, like, well, what would it even mean to join and contribute to the Brotherhood today?
That's a really good question, and I think it's one that a lot of members and ex-members contend with. Right? What does it mean to be what does it mean to be a member of the Brotherhood in Egypt right now? What it means to be a member of the Brotherhood is that you are actively against the state, or that you're actually in prison, and that's why you're there, because you're a member of this band group. But if you're in exile, what it means to some people is that it's a continuation. Being a member of the Brotherhood is being part of an organization that continues to maintain a space of being politically agentic, right? It's not necessarily it's not necessarily out of an abundance of religiosity. It's not necessarily out of an abundance of lack of social mobility and wanting to like climb up the social ladder, but it's an abundance. It's a manifestation of wanting to continue to be active in your anti-regime in your anti-regime sentiments and your anti-regime activism. There's also a sense in which being a part of the Brotherhood might actually help in getting you a citizenship in Turkey, and helping facilitate some sort of job or arrangement for you to stay in Sudan or in Malaysia or in Qatar. And a lot of these social and political bonds were formed in exile. But there is a question of, all right, why did the people that leave the organization, right? And it's not necessarily because they all don't believe in the same Brotherhood's conception of the relationship between state and society and how God fits in the picture. A lot of them left the Brotherhood because they think that the Brotherhood is not being Brotherhood enough. And that's something I heard repeatedly in interviews with former members. They left them because they don't believe that this organization is the right vehicle to continue that type of message and to hold that sentiment anymore.
So is the objection of, so these are members who want a more activist organization, and sort of in our last the last episode of this podcast, one of the things that came up was sort of in the current moment, the Brotherhood leadership seems to be drifting towards a sort of quiescent approach, and sort of maybe a rebuilding, focusing on the spiritual rather than the political, and maybe stepping away from the active engagement in politics that's been the organization's hallmark. So I guess I'm curious about this part of the constituency you're talking about, the part that wants more rather than less. Is it more, more politics that they want? Is it a more like robust or even militant confrontation with the state? Like, what is it that these the people who are leaving because it's not Brotherhood enough? What is it that what is it that they would define as adequately, sufficiently active and engaged brotherhoodness at this juncture?
So I'm going to give you a bit of a longer answer than you hoped for. So um, but the question you're asking touches on something within the Brotherhood that's really quite important to understand. I think that it's a bit overlooked, and and that's the question of citizenship within the Brotherhood. Right? Not all brothers are created equal, even if they are on the same like organizational um name, or so like if you're an akh amil doesn't mean that you're equal to another akh amil. If you have two muntasibs doesn't mean that they're both the same muntasib, right? And it's a difference between, the lines are drawn between people who grew up within the Brotherhood in their own neighborhoods, and those are seen as like more Brotherhood, more in touch with what the Brotherhood actually is and what it means to be a brother, with the Brotherhood's mission, and people who are more engaged in al-amal al-aam, right? People who are more engaged in public facing work, people who grew out of universities, and working within syndicates, like
These are like the
with Futuh,
coastal
for
elites of
instance.
the Muslim Brotherhood, right?
That's one way to put it. These are the coastal elites of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the juncture, like the difference between them there was highlighted in our interviews, and the gap between them was when we asked both leaders and youth, what do you think is the biggest challenge the Brotherhood has to contend with? And these are interviews we did in 2022, right? Just this year, and we saw quite a bit of difference between people who said the biggest challenge we face is wahdat al-saf, is the unity of the organization. We need to make sure everyone feels that they're part of the same organization, that we're all one, and that the organization internally is as strong as as it can be. And another like faction or other members describe the largest challenge that the organization faces is the tens of thousands of political prisoners in Egypt at the moment, right? I think what the former episode is alluding to is the recent or who the organization is going to pick as its new supreme guide, as its new murshid. And what it seems like they're going for is someone who's a lot more acquiescent in his approach, someone who really cares about the sanctity of the organization and sees it front and believes that it's more front and center than more positive and public facing work and engagement with what's going on politically in Egypt. This bifurcation this bifurcation is something that has existed within the Brotherhood, and it's something that has contributed to less than ideal both politics and less than ideal um, terbiya, or less than ideal indoctrination within the Brotherhood. To answer your question more directly, what are people looking for, right? The person that says that it's not Brotherhood enough, or the person that says this is the organization that is great at like the best organization to be a part of at the moment. They're both looking for ideas. They're both looking for ideas, and they're both as to what they could subscribe to, and they're both at a point where these ideas are lacking. And in this new moment where the Brotherhood is and what we call its تأسيس الثالث. It's like it's a critical juncture. It's a restart. It's the third reconstitution of the Brotherhood, unless they come up with good ideas for either party, for the public-facing party, or for the um, inward-looking faction within the organization. The membership crisis will become increasingly severe.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds so. So this sort of moves us on to the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is the sort of void of leadership, void of ideas, and how that plays out for the membership. From one vantage point, the Brotherhood's staying power seems to be rooted in its ability to rebound from massive moments of crackdown, like the one in the 50s and 60s, or like the one at the present moment. And on the other hand, its Achilles heel seems to be that same like single-mindedness of purpose to sort of move forward by existing and exist by moving forward. And then we ask, like, okay, what are the great ideas that this organization is bringing to the crises of its day? And from what I read in your research here, in your work, is that it really hasn't brought any great ideas. After the coup, which followed a really desultory performance during that 1 year in power, in these years of like reaction, repression, massive authoritarianism, mass large scale murder of Brotherhood members, and so on. All these major and minor crises, not just for the Brotherhood, but for Egypt, for political life in Egypt, for any kind of political life whatsoever, suffering under this incredibly repressive and ineffectual government, but that's very effective at maintaining power. What is the Brotherhood's answer to this? What is the Brotherhood's answer to Egypt's crisis, Egypt's emergency? And like you say this with a lot of complexity in the book, but give us your sort of your simple answer. Does the organization even try to address these crises, or is it still just sort of stuck trying to figure out how to survive, how to be an organization, how to sort of be all things to all its different constituencies without really taking a clear view on the present emergency?
So to answer your question directly, no, there are no new ideas. There isn't an answer to Egypt's emergency. There are some answers and fits and starts in a way. So there are so for instance, one answer the Brotherhood has offered is, how about we just do not engage politically? We and Ibrahim Munir, before he passed, came out and said, Ibrahim Munir is a former supreme guide. He came out and said that or former acting supreme guide, he came out and said that the organization won't be running for political office, right? So in that sense, there's sort of like an internalization of a lot of criticism that was made against the Brotherhood, that you guys are the most organized, but it so happens that when you run for office, you cannot conceive of another orientation in which you don't win everything, right? So when he says that we're not going to engage in we're not going to run for political office, that's one type of concession. A lot of former members, though, um, have tried to grapple with this question. And so Amr Darrag is a former member. He's part of these public facing people. He was part of one of the major committees that were in the Brotherhood after 2013. He was a former minister. Him and others in different exiles in Turkey and so on have started their own think tanks where they think about some of these issues, and the issues they write about, talk about, engage with questions of like crises within the Brotherhood, but also talk about Egypt writ large, where they publish books on taxation in Egypt and how to fix the tax system. You're also in a place where a lot of people of the younger generation, there's a network of students who study social sciences in Turkey, who are both undergrads and graduate students, who have who have over 200 members within their network of people who grapple with the same questions that plagued them and that led to their exile, right? What are the consequences of incarceration in Egypt? What are the consequences of exile? How do we work as a diaspora? How did it end up that the Brotherhood lost as much as they did in the coup, or that the project of political Islam in and of itself um, has failed in the region, or was severely challenged in the region? And I think that these are all positive indications that maybe we're at a point where if the organization is able to internalize some of these revisions and some of this new thinking that's happening, that if when it so happens that everyone's back in Egypt, or if there's some sort of political opening, that we might see an emergence of new ideas, of better ideas, frankly, than the ones that came before, and ideas that might contribute to change in the country and to positive change. Where we are now, though, does not necessarily indicate that we are there yet.
We'll pick this point up after the break. I'm Thanasi Kambanis, and I'm talking with Ahmed El Afifi about the membership crisis in the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood in the fifth and last of our Broken Bonds podcast series. We'll be right back.
Today's world is changing faster than ever. Old rules don't apply, and the new rules haven't been written. At least not yet. I'm Rohan Advani, and I produce the Order from Ashes podcast at the Century Foundation, a leading progressive think tank that promotes peace, cooperation, and equality at home and abroad. On Order from Ashes, we try to make sense of a new international system in which America no longer dictates the global order. Join us as we talk to activists and analysts on the front lines of the most pressing issues in international policy.
Welcome back. I'm Thanasi Kambanis. You're listening to Order from Ashes, Century International's podcast, and this is the fifth and final episode in our Broken Bond series, The Existential Crisis of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, 2013 to 2022. I'm talking to Ahmed El Afifi, and we're talking about the membership crisis and also the path forward, sort of where this can go and what it's going to mean. Right before the break, you were talking about the sort of dearth of new ideas, what it would take for there to be a renewal. And I guess I want to like wrap up our part of the conversation about the membership crisis before we move on to the sort of next steps, policy implications, and so on. So when you all wrote this the study of the membership crisis, you talk at length about how this plays out in the diaspora, how this plays out in prisons. And what you were just saying before the break is that ultimately all this ferment and fragmentation and sort of loss of membership, both the meaning of membership and also really the number of members, all this could eventually lead to a renewal. But you were just starting to say, and I want you to elaborate, where is the organization now? Is it in a stage of renewal, or is it still in a moment of like accelerated fragmentation and sort of struggling for coherence? What's the diagnostically, what do you see when you look at this landscape now after all these dozens and dozens of interviews you did that went into the making of this research project?
When you say this, an anecdote comes to mind that one of the interviewees shared with us, and that was as we were conducting interviews, the rift between the group of Mahmoud Hussein and Ibrahim Munir's group, or to oversimplify, like the London office and the Istanbul office, was sort of coming to an end, and the Ibrahim Munir group, in an attempt to like assert its legitimacy and make sure everyone was under its wing, started having sit downs with former members or members who had left the organization for one reason or another, to try to talk to them and to try to like see how the organization itself is going to move forward. And in one of these conversations, the senior leader was saying, or the senior member was saying, um, we have to think together about what the organization can do, what we can do for our country, what we can do vis-a-vis other political parties and factions. How are we going to engage with them? To which one of the younger respondents said, well, before we do all of that, we have to contend with the crises within, right? The trauma we have is the trauma we have from Sisi and from exile and from detainment is as much from the state as it is from you. The trauma we have from you is more than the trauma we have from Sisi in some instances. And before we move on, we need a public reckoning within the organization. How is it that we have been out of the country for nearly a decade, but we're in some ways at the same point that we were in 2013, except we have a lot less resources. Geopolitics is more against us than ever, and there's a dearth of ideas, right? So, in some ways, what I'm trying to say by this is that members within the organization problematize their situation the same way an analyst would, right? It's a decade later, and they're struggling on all fronts. When Munir's faction came to realize this, and it took it seriously, and you'd hear things from members around, like senior members that were very closely working with Munir very closely. They'd say things like, we've put like 1,000 working hours into thinking about how to save Egypt politically and economically, and into thinking about how we can position ourselves vis-a-vis the state and vis-a-vis other organizations. But we haven't seen a positive project put by them just yet. I think one thing to recognize, though, is the difference in the political opening that'll occur based on the Ikhwan putting their best foot forward and having like the most comprehensive, foolproof project to save Egypt, and them having uh, frankly horrible or incoherent project to save Egypt, is really in the situation Egypt is in now at the moment, probably going to lead to the same outcome, right? Because we're not in a time in which political discourse has a lot of credence or has a lot of legitimacy. But I think unless they start doing this work now, they in years from now, when it really matters, when the quality of your work really matters, when the quality of your contribution really matters, unless they have something positive and thoughtful and thought out, they will not be able to engage in politics. And even if they win, if they go back to Egypt and there are elections and they win, a couple of years in, they're going to lose uh, all of their legitimacy, all of their credibility, and all of their and a lot of the support that will have brought them to office.
Well, so that's actually a great setup for the subject we want to end. We want to end this conversation in this series on, which is sort of what happens from here. You titled the last section of the book. You titled it "Unvanquished but No Path to Victory," and I think the question you're trying to answer, the question I want to ask you here is, what's like, we have now almost 10 years of the Brotherhood's experience after the coup, after Rabaa. So where do you see this heading in the 10 years to come? I mean, what's next in this period of the Brotherhood in disarray, fragmentation, and in the political wilderness, or even the social wilderness?
I think it's important to realize that the Brotherhood that Hassan al-Banna started in the late 20s of the last century is not the same Brotherhood we're dealing with almost 100 years later. And I what I worry about is that I don't know that some of the members themselves or the leadership of the organization recognizes that. The way we think about political participation, the way we think about organizing, what we know about how and why social movements succeed and fail, and why people are mobilized or demobilized, is not something that has been that the organization looks at critically. And the organization is yet to answer a lot of questions that has been struggling with since, if not since the inception of the organization, then since the late 50s, and whether they are a religious organization or whether they're a political organization. And I think now more than ever, and in conversations I've had with members of the leftist groups or quote unquote liberal groups in Egypt, now more than ever is a time in which, if everyone else is organized, and they could have a larger impact on how the Brotherhood will shape its ideology, what the Brotherhood will do with the organization. Uh, sitting at, if I think people sitting in the seat of leadership within the Brotherhood look at an organization that has contributed quite a lot to politics in the region, to religious instruction in the region, to economic thinking in the region. Um, but you're at a point now where the organization is a lot bigger than what it could provide, and they have to make really hard decisions about where they're going to put the little resources they have left, because the resources, while they will not end, will continue to decrease as like economic crises hit people, as a lot of their money gets frozen, as their assets get frozen, um, and as recruitment continues to decrease, the money that they get from members in different exiles will continue to decrease as well. One other important, I think, conjecture to to think of is to situate the Brotherhood within a larger context of understanding what happens to groups under authoritarianism, or under decades of repression. And under decades of repression, what organizations tend to do is, I think, that you have a lot of narratives rather than coherent thoughts and ideas and ideology that pushes them forward. And a lot of these like big banner type things like Islam huwa al-hal, or like or our
Islam is the solution.
Islam is the solution, our peacefulness is stronger than bullets, or we will concede or not concede to the state. A lot of that needs to be substantiated by actual thinking and by programs in order to propel the organization forward. What I do think that the last 10 years have proved, though, is that any security oriented solutions will not dissolve the Brotherhood, right? You are not going to imprison the Brotherhood away. You're not going to kill every last member and make sure that there is no Brotherhood anymore. I think the idea is larger than the sum of the parts of the organization, and the only way if like the only way that like the Brotherhood is going to cease to exist in one way or another as having these dual roles, as a political player and also being and also a religious player, so to say, is if the state starts in like opens up a little bit, right? If the states, or if Egypt, or the Brotherhood in other parts of the Arab world are allowed to fail in politics on their own, or allowed or have to come to grapple with a society that has better ideas to pick from, or has uh, contentions that they have with them. But I think the point I want to take home is that the Brotherhood cannot be imprisoned away. The Brotherhood cannot be exiled away. It's a problem. It's an organization that is far-reaching within the Egyptian state. It draws on sentiments that people associate with. Over the last 90 plus years, they have been a space for political agency in ways other organizations have not. Hisham Salam's new book, which I recommend, Classes Politics, talks about how the space was created in the friction between the left and the Islamists under Sadat, but it was nonetheless there. And the Brotherhood was a space for political mobilization, for learning how to mobilize, even if people did not stay within the organization. So, despite the decades of demonization, they have continued to have a base in the country, and they will continue to have a base in the country. And the only way to see their politics away is to let them fail on their own.
I mean, I think this is one of the really important and innovative implications of your work here and your study, you and your co-authors in Broken Bonds, is there's a huge amount of talk about the Brotherhood as an ideological phenomenon or as a security problem. It's the way that the Egyptian government has chosen to conceive of it. Sometimes it's the way the UK, the US, and others have chosen to think about and talk about the Brotherhood. But in fact, what you give us a picture of is something else entirely, which is a fully institutionalized movement that has organizations and membership in institutions and legitimacy that far transcends any individual leader or member. And so we need to think of it sociologically, think of it as it's a movement, it's a party, it's an institution. It has changed over time and presumably will continue to do so, but it cannot be properly understood through a security prism, and nor can it be managed in practical terms through security tools. Now, the other thing that you convinced me of through this book and through the things you've showed here is that the Brotherhood doesn't really understand itself. The Brotherhood and its leadership have a very rigid idea of what they are, but that idea is not entirely accurate, right? So they think they seem to talk about themselves and think of themselves as a mass ideological organization that can sort of seamlessly shift between a political role and a social or religious role as the times dictate, and that is somehow like timeless and enduring, and everywhere all at once. But what you all have, through these extensive interviews and really granular detailed documentation, what you show is that this is actually a, yes, effective and enduring, but it's an elite membership based organization whose roots and persistence have largely been as a result of being able to effectively service its membership. So not some mass public, but rather it's relatively small actual membership, and so that's both been its sort of recipe for success, and also its great limitation. That is why it doesn't adapt and evolve the way a mass membership political movement, let's say, would. And I guess I want to end on that note, which is the next generation of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood. Is it the generation that is right now organizing and running itself inside Egypt's prisons? Is that where the 10, 20, 30 years from now Muslim Brotherhood is going to be formed from?
I think the next generation of the leadership within the Muslim Brotherhood is going to depend on the quality of ideas that people outside of prison are able to bring to the table. So once you have older leaders and you have a cadre of people who have paid so much in so much of years of their lives behind bars, of torture, so when they come out, the quality of ideas that they're going to see, what's left of the organization, is going to determine the trajectory of the organization. If it's more of the same, then we're going to go back to a situation where we're recreating these same crises, where we're going to have ordeal-based legitimacies running the organization with or the identity of the organization is going to continue to be amorphous, and where the membership crisis will still be there, but you'll have a lot of recruits with very little to offer, even if these like material resources are there, but where still having some of the same issues that we discussed earlier. If the people outside of prisons are able to think creatively and convincingly about what the organization can do, and what the organization should be doing and where it should be spending its resources, we might be in for an organization that is a lot more coherent in its strategy, and that people who come out of prisons are able to seamlessly fold within the organization. The organization, if it wants to contain, needs to continue to reset and restart and re-strategize based on its own terms, not always in reactionary terms to severe waves of repression by the state.
And I'm struck that, even as you document in really, excruciating detail how deep the crisis and drift within this organization, the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, is, at the same time, it remains, I think, the most vibrant and maybe the sole active repository of alternative politics for Egypt in a period of unprecedented state repression. Is that right?
Yes, and I think that speaks to the resiliency both of the organization itself and of the members. It's hard to underscore how difficult it is to be a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's hard to underscore how much people in prison and their families and the organization itself suffers. It's easy to criticize and point and blame, and sometimes rightfully so, a lot of the leaders of the organization, in saying that they failed, and saying that they were horrible, and saying that some of the things they did and said and continue to say and do are, quite frankly, and excuse my French, stupid, right? But the reality of the matter is, because they no, but the reality of the matter is that there is something to be said that they are still able to retain a lot of legitimacy in one way or another amongst the public or amongst other people who haven't yet had public outbursts against the organization. A lot of that does not have to do with the organization being very smart on its own, but has to do with the nature of repression in Egypt and the conditions that Sisi has created for the carceral state to exist as it is. In and I think that speaks to how and why the Brotherhood has continued to contribute to public life and political life before, from the 20s onwards till today. I think in a situation in which Egypt is truly pluralistic and in which people are allowed to freely associate and organize politically, a lot of these the Brotherhood will be acknowledged as an organization that has maintained the space for oppositional politics, but it will have to contend with better ideas and have to upgrade and update a lot of its ideas and organizational mechanisms to remain relevant.
And in the years and decades to come, Egypt is going to continue to be a really important country in the Middle East and the Arab world. And the Brotherhood is going to continue to be a really important pole for political action and thinking, both in Egypt and across the region, a sort of guide and source of ideas and approaches, bad ones, as well as one hopes eventually good ones. And so if we want to have some clues about where Egypt and the region and Islamism, Islamist politics are headed, we would do well to start with a close read of Broken Bonds, which is a new book that Ahmed El-Afifi, who we were just talking to, Abdurrahman Ayash and Noha Izzat have written. The book's called Broken Bonds, The Existential Crisis of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, 2013 to 2022. You can find this podcast and the previous ones in its series, as well as information about how to read the book at the Century Foundation's website, tcf.org. This is the fifth and final episode in Broken Bonds special series on the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. I hope you listeners have enjoyed as much as I have this journey that helps explain what has become of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt over the last decade and why that matters. Ahmed El-Afifi, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Tanasi. I appreciate you.
And congratulations to you, Abdurrahman Ayash and Noha Izzat, for your fantastic research, which really lifts engaging and also entertaining curtain on what's been happening in the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood over the last decade. Thanks for listening. This is Order from Ashes, Century International's podcast, and I'm Thanasi Kambanis. Until next time. The Order from Ashes podcast has been brought to you by Century International. Our work builds on more than 100 years of commitment to international peace, security, and governance at the Century Foundation. We are independent, critical, and progressive. For more information about Century International's work, please visit tcf.org or follow us on Twitter and Facebook. We depend on audience feedback to reach new listeners. If you like what you hear, please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts.